Today, you are hearing the incredible story of Leslie Schwartz, a man who overcame incredible odds to survive Nazi concentration camps during the Holocaust. Leslie was 14 years old when he and his family were rounded up in their Hungarian village and shipped to Auschwitz. Like all Holocaust prisoners, he would endure unimaginable treatment and starvation, and he would become the only member of his family to survive. But here's what makes this story pretty special. Leslie's day of freedom came with the help of a platoon of African-American soldiers from Mississippi. And that's why some 70 years later, he traveled to Hattiesburg to pay tribute to his heroes after all these years. While here, Leslie toured and attended a reception at the African-American Military History Museum, and he also met with students in a USM history class. Today, he's sharing his story with Dr. Allison Abra, Associate Professor at the USM's Dale Center for the Study of War and Society.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Schwartz, for agreeing to speak to me today. I wondered if we could start by you telling me a little bit about your life in Hungary before the Second World War.
I had a fairly decent childhood. My family was sort of upper middle class. My father was an extremely gifted man, even though he had polio, but he was very, very strict. Mm-hmm. And I believe some of that upbringing had to do that I was able to endure the punishment that I went through as a 14-year-old.
Can you speak a little bit about when things started to change in Hungary? What was your first memory of the Nazis?
The Hungarian Jews, of course, were the last one to be taken. Mm-hmm. We were taken in 1944, May. But prior to 1944, it was difficult for a Jewish kid to mingle with former Christian friends. Every day there were signs all over a little town. Jews, what are you doing here? Why don't you go to Palestine? Of course, there was no Israel yet. Mm-hmm. That was constantly ridiculing us. Mother was very friendly with our Postmaster General, and the postmaster tipped my mom off that in the next 2 days we are going to be taken away. Okay. And I asked my mother, why? He says, because we are Jewish. We were able to carry as much as we were able to. And my mother had to give her jewelry, money, anything that was precious, and that was immediately confiscated. And from there, we went to a place called Kisvárda city. And we were there for approximately a month and a half. Okay. And then we had to go to the railroad station. And of course, we had no idea about Auschwitz or any of these concentration camps. So we traveled for a few days. We were approximately anywhere from 80 to 100 people in these cattle cars. And of course, we had no toilet facilities. And the food that we were able to take, of course, with each passing day, we had less and less. And it was quite difficult. So we traveled, and then finally we arrived. It was midnight, very dreary, and the SS with their German Shepherd jumped up to these wagons, everybody out, leave everything behind, and we had to men in one line, children and mothers in another line. I did not know what to do. Shall I stay with my mom or shall I go with my stepfather?
Right.
But as the people were moving ahead, of course I had no idea who Dr. Mengele was, who was making the selection. And I got frightened when I saw when babies were taken from mother's arm,
Right.
and that frightened me. And I decided to stay with the men.
And you've described that as the decision that saved your life.
Yes. So when I came to front of Dr. Mengele, he asked me, "How old are you?" But I was tipped off by someone when, of course, I didn't know who Mengele was.
Of course.
Tell whoever is going to ask you, tell him you are 17. So I told, I'm 17, and he said, let me feel your muscle. So he felt my muscle, but I had an idea that this had to do probably to allocate people because as you know, the Germans were all fighting a war, and there was shortage of manpower, and I suppose we were the substitute. So that was the last time I saw my stepfather, and I asked him, do you think I should go with you? Oh, he said, no, you're better off staying with the children. Of course, he had no idea what happened to these children. So I go into the children's, as they call lager camp, and they were laughing and playing, and it didn't make sense to me. I said, how is this possible that they are really acting like children? And my luck was that in Auschwitz you were able to go from barracks to barracks. And my best friend's brother, Shando Gross, from my hometown, who was 5 years older, I went to him and I said to him, I'm so miserable with these kids. Do you mind if I go with you? He says, come. And they were gathering people 17 to 40 or 45, and I was able to get in with that group. Sheer luck.
Sheer luck.
And of course, I was missing from the children's barrack. And as we are about to get in on these cattle car trains in Auschwitz, I had a prison number, but it was only a transport number.
Okay.
Which was given in Auschwitz, and I was missing from the children's barrack because every morning and every evening we had a roll call.
So they knew exactly who was there.
And I was missing. Yeah. So I said to Shandor, I'll bet you know they're probably going to kill me. And Shandor says to me, I think so.
So by that point, you'd started to realize what was really going on at Auschwitz?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was, luckily, I was only 10 days in Auschwitz, and it was just unbearable. You know, hunger catches up with you.
course.
We had black coffee, and of course, as a teenager, I only drank milk, and for lunch, we had some kind of soup made out of horse meat, but everything that was given was delicious. You know, hunger doesn't know.
So the hunger is sort of your strongest memory
Right.
of that time? Do you know what happened to your family? Have you ever been able to find out for sure?
Well, I took it for granted. Well, of course, my half-sister who was 6 months old, she was immediately thrown into the gas chamber. And I took it for granted that my mom and sister likewise, but it wasn't so. In 1943, I was going home from New York City. I was in the subway, and I overheard these two ladies speak Hungarian. So I introduced myself, and they were also from our neighboring village.
Wow.
And they knew my mom and my sister. They were alive 2 days before liberation, and the English Air Force made a mistake in the Baltic. There were 10,000 women on a ship, and they thought it was a military transport, and they bombed the ship. So that was a
So sorry.
horrible nightmare for me for months and months. You know, it was hard for me to accept the fact that they were alive 2 months before liberation.
Of course. So can you speak a little bit about what happened after Auschwitz? How you ended up, you went to Dachau first, I believe, and then
Yeah.
to Muhldorf on the
Well,
train?
being that I was only 14 years old, I did not belong to the workforce.
Right.
But of course, when we arrived in Dachau, I saw it when we pulled into the station. But of course, I had no idea what Dachau represents. But leaving Auschwitz, and of course, they were very much interested in our ability as far as a working force, so they treated us much better. Whenever we went to an engagement, there were always 2 or 3 guards and 1 officer. And this officer somehow felt sorry for me, which was unique.
Mm-hmm.
And he did not want me to go out at the railroad tracks where they were putting down new tracks, you know, pretty difficult,
It's hard labor. Yeah.
hard labor. And he said to me, "You stay here," you know, which was a barrack. And they used to have lunch there, the soldiers. And I had the opportunity to be left alone.
I know that you have done a lot of speaking and in fact made a film about your experiences on the train to Muhldorf.
Muhldorf was the biggest concentration camp that was affiliated with Dachau. Towards the end of the war, life became unbearable. The Germans themselves had very little, and of course they were not interested in feeding us.
Right.
So on April 25th, 1945, 3,600 Hungarian Jews, 80 of these transport wagons, we were put on anywhere from 80 to 100. No toilet facility, no anything. and starvation was just unbearable. I used to bend down to pick up grass. Hopefully that will do something, but of course I'm not an animal, and it did not do anything. And we traveled, and we came to a small station near Munich called Poing, P-O-I-N-G. And the train stopped, and then I see one of the guards waving, "You are free." So when I heard this, "You are free," I was with 3 of my friends that I got to know in concentration camp, and I said to them, "Look, this looks like a village, farming village, that we are able to get something to eat." And I went in to this beautiful farmhouse, and of course I was always the kid. And this lady, who was a devout Catholic lady, I mean, you can imagine how I must have looked. I was down to 35 pounds. She gave me a huge glass of milk, and she just made some fresh butter and a delicious piece of bread, and I was in heaven.
The best meal you ever had.
And suddenly I hear hands up in the back.
Wow.
I was then 15, and this was a Hitler Youth, 16. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I lived through, and now I have to die." But as a kid in Hungary, for short distance, no one was able to catch me. Don't ask me how I jumped this fence in that condition, and I was in an open field running, and he was screaming, "Stop," and "Stop." And finally, a bullet hit me, entered my neck, exited on my cheek. I fell, and he came to me pointing his gun. He said, "Either you stand up, otherwise I have to give you another bullet." I said, "No, I stand up." They took me back to the wagons, and as we were going back, all over, 54 killed, 200 wounded. But the amazing thing, when you are in a condition like this, nothing matters to you. You are preoccupied with your own existence.
Right.
There is no such a thing as feeling sorry. This is how this Nazi movement was able to bring a human being down to not caring and not giving. So I don't have to tell you the pain that I had without anything until 2 days later, finally, the 7th Division from General Patton liberated us near Munich, city called Tutzing.
Okay. And there were some soldiers from Mississippi there, is that right?
I knew that there was a race, a Negro race, which whatever I learned in Hungary, but I have never met one.
Okay.
And that was also kind of unique. I knew they are in the American Army uniform, and they came to the displaced person camp, very cheerful, very upbeat, and brought us some food, and of course mostly it was chocolate and chewing gum, which was the thing back in 45. And it left me a wonderful, wonderful feeling, how caring and how humble and cheerful they were.
Had you ever heard of Mississippi before?
No,
And this is your first trip here
right.
since then. So what does it mean to you to come to Mississippi, having met these men
Well,
back in
I
45?
always reminisce about 1945 when I met these wonderful people. So when I arrived in 1946 to the U.S., I was terribly disappointed.
Okay.
The treatment of these people who fought and gave their life, and I'm sure you know many of them, when they were fighting in Italy, how many were killed there. And I could not endure this kind of, I just couldn't cope with it. Why is this? That's why I am so excited about this afternoon to meet these wonderful people, of reminiscing about 1945.
Leslie never knew the names of the men who befriended him and treated him so kindly, but he did meet with a World War II veteran who could have been one of his liberators. Elbert Hopkins was in the 784th Tank Battalion when he helped free Dachau prisoners during the same time period. At 90 years old, Elbert's memory has faded a bit, and on the day of their meeting, he was hospitalized for health issues. But that didn't stop the two men from having a joyous and emotional connection.
If you guys are not there, I would have been dead.
Yeah.
The first American that came to get me was from the medic, and they took me to the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, as much as I was able to know about the so-called Negro folks as a kid in school, but I never saw a Negro in my life.
You never.
Never.
Did you see pictures?
Well, you know, as a 14-year-old kid in a history book.
Yeah. I know, I understand.
But what was the most beautiful thing which I'm going to take to my grave? When the soldiers came to the displaced person camp, it's called the DP camps,
Yeah. This place.
and they brought us food and, you know, the usual.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it, the kindness.
I know.
You know, it was something new to me as a kid.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when I came to the U.S. and to witness what was going on here, I could not believe it.
Yeah.
I said, how is this possible? These men gave their life and fought along with their white so-called friends, and yet,
Thank you.
and yet to be so hostile. That was very difficult for me to live with.
Yeah. What I be trying to find the compassion of other folks.
Yeah.
How you look at me and I'm brown and black, whatever they want to say. You know?
Now, I see.
Well, I try to be good all the time.
I see a wonderful human being in front of me.
Yeah.
You know, that never came to my mind. To me, it's the kindness and the
Thank you.
caring.
That's the way I look at it.
And that's what I experienced as a young kid. And it was so important for me to receive this love. I lost everybody. You know, I was an orphan. And
Excuse me. What do you mean you lost everybody? I asked you about your son.
My family was killed.
Oh, you've been through a whole lot.
But always upbeat.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise you go nuts.
I'm so glad I met you.
And I'm happy I met you.
Mm-hmm.
I came here from Florida to see you.
But you made me wish I was the one that really liberated you from the concentration camp. But I don't know. I know it was one camp that we did liberate some Jewish people from.
Yeah.
But by Seventh Church being there first, and they did a whole lot of deliberation, it probably could have been one of them.
But
that
to
liberated you.
as far as I'm concerned, you are the one.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Leslie and Elbert for allowing us to sit in on their conversation. Our production team says the love and admiration in that room was powerful. And we're grateful to USM, Dr. Allison Abra, and Merit Health Wesley Medical Center for helping us tell this remarkable story. We hope you've been inspired by it. We'll see you next time on Conversations.